Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about quite an extraordinary phenomenon: Tibetan Lamas who can chant 3 notes simultaneously. Not many voices in harmony, but a single voice, in effect, singing a chord. We'll be listening to what that sounds like and talking about the significance of the chant. Our guest is Houston Smith, a professor of philosophy who's devoted his teaching and writing career to bridging the gaps between East and West, science and the humanities. Dr. Smith was born of missionary parents in China, where he lived until he was 17. He's taught philosophy at MIT and other major universities in the United States, and Dr. Smith produced award-winning films on Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, and Sufism. He is the author of several books, including The Religions of Man, The Search for America, Forgotten Truth, and Beyond the Postmodern Mind. Can you tell us, Dr. Smith, first what this chanting is all about and how you came to know about it?
Well, it's a discovery within the last 21 years, which is when I first stumbled upon it, a discovery for the West of a unique power of the human voice, which we had not known was possible before. Namely, as you indicated, for a single voice to sing multitones simultaneously. Now, that's basically the phenomenon, not just a tenor, a baritone, and a bass singing in harmony, but a single voice, in effect, doing that. As to how I came upon it, I was doing some research among the Tibetans and living in at one of their monasteries, and I chanced to be in one which was one of the 2 monasteries in all of Tibet that trained their lamas to sing in this special way. When they began doing this, I was, needless to say, astonished and scrounged around, beat the bushes for a tape recorder. I remember my first thought, I was then teaching at MIT, my first thought was, Klaus Liebmann will never believe me. Klaus Liebmann being the music director at MIT, I said, I've got to have some evidence. So as I say, I found in a high school nearby a little tape recorder and went back and recorded this. And when I got back to MIT, I asked around who was doing the major work on the acoustics of the human voice, and was directed to Professor Kenneth Stevens. This was rather fun because when I told him what I had in my hand, one could see just the faint trace of a smile as he waited to see what this philosopher had garbled in his understanding. But when he put it on his tape deck, his expression changed dramatically, and we ended up co-authoring an article for the Journal of the American Acoustical Society, as he did verify what I had suspected, namely, this was a phenomenon that the West did not know was possible.
In music, oftentimes there are special individuals who have voice capabilities unlike others,
Right.
the ability to sing particularly low notes or particularly high notes.
Yes.
And I guess you've answered it already in terms of training people. Does that mean that every human voice has the capability to do this?
Well, there are variations in quality. Naturally, certain voices have talents beyond others. So within the Lamas, by the way, then there were 88 in this. This was in a refugee monastery because Tibet had been taken over by the Chinese. And there in Lhasa, there were 800 of these, but in the refugee monastery, there were only 88. And they all did it. They were all able to do it, but there were virtuosos among the lot.
We're going to listen to some examples, but I'm also curious, did you attempt to learn this technique, and how successful were you?
I admire this from afar. It's so far beyond me that I haven't seriously. I have given a little go at the Mongolian form, and perhaps we may have a sample of that later, but the Tibetan form is too much for me.
All right, let's listen to a couple of these examples so that our listeners can understand what it is that we're talking about.
All right, I think we might begin with the choir. Now, this will be the monks as a group doing this, but we need to be aware as we listen to them singing that this is not a case of choral singing. It's not basses over here, baritones, and tenors over there. Everything that we hear, each of these lamas will be producing by himself.
What is it that they are chanting? Is it a mantra?
Yes, it is a mantra, and by their lights, these mantras are the most sacred and therefore the most powerful in the whole Tibetan canon. Actually, traditionally, this sound was not heard very much by Tibetans themselves, because there was a belief that if you had not had the proper initiation or training, why this would be too much for you to handle psychically.
Was this a little sacrilegious then to record it and play it back here?
Well, it's very interesting. When I did verify that this was something that the West had not known was possible, then it was easy to get a grant and go back with quality professional equipment, sound equipment, and get a quality recording. But in order to do that, we had to get special permission from the abbot because, as you rightly pick up on, if this is esoteric material, which is too powerful and for the laity, then to put it on a recording is kind of anomalous. But the abbot and ultimately the Dalai Lama gave his permission to do so, saying that since we live in exceptional times when there is actually a danger that the Tibetan tradition might go under through the invasion of the Chinese, that exceptional times call for exceptional measures. And therefore, under these times, it would not be inappropriate for a few of these mantras to be released to the world.
There seemed to be in that recording that we just heard an increase in intensity. They went up a little bit in pitch.
That's
and
true.
There was a building that was there.
You're quite right. They actually have a very limited range for this phenomenon, only a half tone. And you were very good. Your ear have a good ear in picking up on this. They moved up that half tone, and actually, if you're in their presence, why that creates a tension there, which is resolved only when they finally slide it back down to the original chord in which they began.
How long, I imagine this to be part of a, for lack of a better description, a religious ceremony.
Yes.
How long does the ceremony last? And
Well,
how long is
this one happened to last 60 hours. That is to say, 4 days, 15 hours a day. We began, I say we, I actually, living in with them, they are more like my fraternity brothers than any I have had in this country. But we would begin at 3 a.m. in the morning and go straight through until 6, with 2 10-minute toilet breaks and 2 very simple meals served right in position. Position meaning at that point they were building their ceremonial hall, and so they had a ceremonial tent, a very large tent, and they were seated on mats in 6 rows in this large tent.
A specific physical position on those mats?
Well, they don't hold to the kind of military posture of the Zen Buddhists. Incidentally, when I was in the Zen monastery, the time was almost exactly the same. We would sit for 14 and a half hours in the Zen monastery and 15 here. But the Zen require a very strict posture, the full lotus posture, and no moving, whereas the Tibetans were much more relaxed about that. And in other ways they were different too, because in Zen it was silence for 14 and a half hours virtually, a few tiny little chants, but virtually 14 and a half hours of silence. Here they never stopped singing for 15 hours a day except for these brief breaks, and they never referred to a note, and I was told they didn't repeat themselves in this entire ceremonial for 60 hours of material simply memorized.
Here's a real dumb question, but 60 hours, 15 hours a day with 10-minute breaks and so on, did they refer to any kind of timekeeping device, or was this also done by memory?
I never saw a clock. I still wore mine. I referred to mine. I don't know what kind
How long have we been here?
What kind of a monitoring system they use, whether they have internal clocks or go by the sun. I just don't know.
You referred to esoteric meaning. Have you been able to discern what that was?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. Not in terms of perhaps the specifics, but I think I do know the meaning, and it really unfolds in a general way. I know it. And let me say it in two ways. One that I think we in the West can understand, can get a feeling for. The second, we can hear the words, but I'm not sure that we can really follow along with it. The one we can understand is this. The way these lamas do this, and by the way, we haven't we've heard what they do, but we haven't said how they do it. But what they're basically doing is sounding a very low fundamental. Now, every fundamental awakens overtones, and we hear these. This is what gives the richness to our sung and spoken voices. But normally we hear them too faintly for us to identify them as separate, discrete notes in their own right. Now, what these lamas have learned how to do is to reshape their vocal cavities. That's somewhere at the base of the throat up to the bridge of the nose, to reshape their vocal cavities in ways that resonate or amplify certain overtones, to the point that we now can hear those overtones as if they were discrete tones in their own right. All right, now that's how they do it. Now, but you were asking for the religious meaning of what they're doing. Overtones have a great symbolic power to awaken numinous or feelings of awe within us, because overtones, once one thinks about it, stand in exactly the same relation to the fundamental as the sacred stands to our normal mundane existence. That is to say, we sense the awesomeness, the mystery of life, but subliminally. We don't often have it in full view, in contact with it. So their ability to shift musical overtones from subliminal to direct focal awareness is analogous to shifting the sense of the sacred from subliminal to direct view, because the sacred does symbolize something, stand as something that we can sense but not see, sense but not hear, say but not explicitly. So I think that's symbolically very powerful going on here. But now, that's something that has to do with religious symbolism and is understandable. But now, for them, this is not symbolism. This is spiritual technology, actually. This isn't art for art's sake. But every technology has a science behind it. Now, the Tibetan science behind this spiritual technology runs like this. Reality is waved. Waved reality is sound. It follows that reality is sound. If I were to ask you, are you sound, you'd probably take it as a quaint way of asking, are you well? But for them, it would be literal. Am I sound? Sure, I'm sound, you're sound, the trees are sound, the music of the spheres, everything is sound. So the question becomes not are we sound, but which wavelength are our lives riding? Which wavelengths are we vibrating to? Now, when the monks go into this, and this is their most sacred chant in all of Tibetan history, what they're doing actually is modulating their lives onto the wavelengths of the gods, so that to the degree that they succeed, the power of the tutelary deity that they're invoking will be theirs as well, just as two strings of the same length, set one vibrating and the other will vibrate sympathetically. As their meditation proceeds, it goes through 3 stages. In the first stage, they're very much aware that they are producing the sound. But in the second stage, it begins to seem to them as though the deity is producing the sound and they're going along simply for the ride. And then if their meditation reaches climax, then at that point the distinction between monk, deity, and sound collapses altogether, and all there is that one holy tone.
Before we listen to another sound, there is something that kind of popped into the back of my head. The closest thing that I've heard to it is the monastic sound of Gregorian chant in the West. Is there a connection?
No historical connection, but there's a natural, even physiological connection. Some people are doing very interesting work on the Gregorian chant, noting how those sounds actually affect the bodies of the monks in very beneficial ways. That's a kind of new area of research now. So it's a kind of cognate phenomenon, but historically they developed totally independently.
These people seem to be, that are involved, I know, in the Western tradition of Gregorian chant in monasteries, they seem to be able to exist with less sleep, less food. They seem to have pretty good health records and that sort of thing.
Sure. That does seem to be the case.
Okay, let's listen to another example.
Are you going to do a solo now? All right, well, now we'll hear, the last one we heard was of the choir, but this one will be of a single voice, the cantor doing the chord effect.
What is the relationship of the symbol that interrupts the cant?
I don't understand that. It's very complicated. A professor of musicology at the University of Washington has worked out the mathematics of the sound effects, which include not only the cymbal, the percussion, but horns and so on. And that sounded like frontier physics as I read his article. The preciseness and detail and complexity of the whole orchestration of this. But I myself, it's too vast. I haven't gotten into that.
One seems very dissonant and the other very harmonious. They almost seem like polar opposites.
Well, that's I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's true that the symbols, like the gong, it's like a shattering where there are so many fragments of sound, whereas in the vocal, why, it's a drawing together, it's a harmonizing in that sense of the word.
It must be quite a different experience, one, to listen to these sounds, but if you are actually producing the sounds, then the vibration inside you, I would imagine, is quite different.
Oh, I'm sure that it is. One can, you rightly sense that. I can't speak from the inside. I wish I could, but I'm sure that it does that.
Did you explain why the tones are so low?
Again, this appears to be the requirements of the human vocal mechanism. The fact that there are two monasteries, as I mentioned, only two in all of Tibet. These were the highest tantric ritualistic colleges. And having come upon this one, Jutta, I made a point to visit the other one, which was Jumei. And it too, though its chanting was significantly different, the fifth was accented, musical fifth, whereas these monks accent the third. Nevertheless, both pitched their fundamental just as low as the human voice could go.
Is this incantation ongoing? Are they doing this as we speak?
I'm so glad. Just in May, month before last, 11 of these monks came to this country for a tour, first time in the United States, and they were in Berkeley. And Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead, who is very much engrossed and absorbed and kind of enchanted by this sound, thanks to his good offices, where we filled the largest theater, 3,500 people, turned away 500. The thrilling thing to me was this was 21 years later after I had stumbled upon, I'd been with them. That's archetypally the length of a generation. And only 3 of the 11 were of the older, my generation, had been there. All the others were infants when I was there. But it was just thrilling because under extreme adversity, you know, these people are in exile. This younger generation was as good as their teachers, as their forebearers. And so a tradition, by my lights, a vitally important tradition, is being transmitted, a transmission is being affected.
Are they doing what they're doing for their own spiritual benefit and development, or is this singing intended to have an impact beyond the monastery?
Absolutely. It's really, I think it's a way to think of it is that they're like a broadcasting station. They broadcast grace upon their people and upon the world. And as we saw them off at the Oakland airport, just before they boarded the plane on their own, with nothing, no prompting from us, they grouped together and began their chanting in the Oakland airport at the base of one of these tubes onto the plane. The people just stopped in their tracks, the people around, and one woman actually, when they left, I had noticed her, but tears were streaming down her face, and she came up to me and said, "What was that?" But what they were doing was giving their blessing to the Bay Area before they boarded the plane.
And we're all better for it.
I'm sure.
Can women do it?
Oh, a good question. Good question. I'm tempted to say no. I'm sorry to say that, but I don't know. I don't know. It seems to be possible only at this very deep register, which rivals the Russian bassos to do. And but of course, I wouldn't have thought this was possible until I heard it. So perhaps in my next incarnation, I shall stumble upon nuns doing this likewise.
You have listened, obviously, through the recordings to a lot of this music. Has it had a specific impact that you can judge on your own life?
Well, you know, we each know ourselves so imperfectly that I'm certainly not going to speak of change, but behavior change is the most ticklish thing to measure. All I can say that it has just been profoundly important to me in the sense that that sound resonates in my head just periodically. And many things in the environment will trigger it. On a plane, sometimes there will be a register, a note going that's akin to that, and there will be, I mean, I just build in, I just internally add to what I hear externally. And of course, every time I hear it, it does feel to me a kind of coming as a blessing my way.
What about mechanical reproductions? I think we have one of those. Can we listen to that?
Oh, yes. When I took this, my original tape to MIT, and took it to the Ken Stevens, who was working on the acoustics of the human voice, why, when he heard this, one of the first things he did was to take a spectroscope of it so he could see the wave pattern, and then he programmed this in so that his computer simulated the sound.
That was the half-tone increase.
That's right. We should remember that this was my original with a poor tape recording, so it's not very good quality recording. I could only hear two notes there. La, 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 a third, and then a half tone down from that. But when you're in their presence, you could get the fifth very clearly.
Are you optimistic that this tradition will be continued?
Well, I'm much more hopeful than I was when I recorded this. I actually also made film of Tibetan Buddhism because this was back in the mid-60s, and I was very discouraged. After all, how many people have been able to hold their tradition together in prolonged exile? The Jews have managed, but in the long range, they're pretty close to the only ones. But now we're 20 years down the line, and certainly they have shown a vitality, an ingenuity, just their presence in the United States. Though few in numbers, nevertheless, they have made an impact. So I'm now hopeful, more hopeful than I was before.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.